Ladies and gentlemen, WrestleMania is almost here. It's almost here. I am so psyched up. I cannot wait. I love WrestleMania. WrestleMania is one of only two WWE pay-per-views that I'll actually pay to watch, that and the Royal Rumble. And WrestleMania is a huge deal for me every year. I cannot wait. And one of, if not the main attraction of WrestleMania, not just this year, but every year, is the Undertaker's streak. The defense of the greatest streak in the history of professional wrestling. And I know a lot of people will point to Tatanka's undefeated streak, and will point to Goldberg's undefeated streak of 180 or whatever it was, as we both know, Goldberg's streak for sure the number was entirely fabricated. Tatanka's streak, I'm not 100% sure, but it is undeniable that the Undertaker's streak is the greatest streak in the history of professional wrestling. And yes, before people go into it, I know professional wrestling is scripted. I don't treat professional wrestling as though it's real. Blah, 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 blah. I've been a pro wrestling fan for 20 years. I understand these things, and I will still say that the Undertaker's streak is one of the most significant things that has ever happened in professional wrestling. And to me, it is always the highlight, the main event of WrestleMania. What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. This video is dedicated entirely to a couple of things. Talking about the Undertaker's streak, we're going to go down every match that the Undertaker has had on his current 19-0 WrestleMania streak. We're going to talk a little in depth about the match that he has coming up on Sunday against rematch against Triple H. This will be the trilogy, actually, of matches with Triple H. This will be the third time they meet at WrestleMania inside the Hell in the Cell. And that's something that I want to make a focal point of us talking about the match. Before we do that, let's talk about the streak. Let's talk about how we got here. Undertaker, of course, made his debut at Survivor Series 1990. And that same, well, not that same year, but less than a year later, he made his WrestleMania debut, WrestleMania VII, against Jimmy Superfly Snuka. This match, you watch it back today and, yeah, it's significant because it's the Undertaker's first match. The match itself, only iffy. Jimmy Snuka is an all-time talent in professional wrestling. I love Jimmy Snuka. I love watching his matches. I think he had tons of charisma, that he was a good worker, he was a good wrestler. This match was only about 5 minutes long, and it was basically a squash match. Undertaker went in and destroyed him. But at the same time, I don't think I would have wanted to see anything else. Because going into that match with a guy like Jimmy Snuka, who is so universally praised and respected as a pro wrestler, to go in and squash him in 5 minutes really establishes Undertaker as a badass. And this was the point that part of Undertaker's persona was being almost impervious to pain. Like, he would, as part of his gimmick, would no-sell opponents' attacks. So opponents would strike him and he'd just do nothing. He'd just stand there. So he was, part of his persona was being almost impervious to pain. And he showed that in the match with Snuka. And like I said, it was only about 5 minutes. He tombstones him. End of the match. The announcers are going crazy. Like, oh my God, he just beat Jimmy Snuka in 5 minutes on the biggest stage in wrestling. And that was really, he'd been there for almost a year, but that was really the taking off point for The Undertaker. Move to a year later, WrestleMania VIII, his second match against Jake the Snake Roberts. Jake the Snake Roberts, another guy that is was a great talent at the time. This is another match that was it was under 10 minutes. It was a 7 or 8 minute match. I actually really liked the build and the backstory to this match. It was a lot of Jake the Snake sort of attacking Paul Bearer. and of course threatening him with the snake and everything like that. And he was saying this like, "Oh, I guarantee I'm bringing a snake to the ring," and all this good stuff. It was a little bit of back and forth in the match. It was mostly Undertaker. Undertaker finished the match, of course, with a tombstone on the outside, and that's actually a really popular image through the history of the WWF. Tombstones him on the outside, rolls him into the ring, and pins him, and that's the end of the match. A little bit better match, I would say, than there was against Snuka, because there was a little bit of back and forth, but, of course, Undertaker reigns supreme. Next year, WrestleMania IX, and his third match against Giant Gonzalez. Undertaker won this match by disqualification in one of the most disjointed Undertaker matches I've ever seen. Another under 10-minute match, which really, when you're in there with Giant Gonzalez, it pretty well had to be an under 10-minute match, because Giant Gonzalez is not the kind of guy that could move very well in the ring. He also wore that obnoxiously, that stupid bodysuit. Anyways, Giant Gonzalez was pretty physically dominant in the match, as he was in 98% of his matches. And Undertaker was absorbing a lot of punishment, was giving some back. They're sort of going back and forth. And inexplicably, really, Giant Gonzalez gets this cloth full of chloroform and chloroforms Taker and knocks him out right in front of the referee. So, disqualification, obviously. So he chloroforms him. Undertaker gets carted off. He comes back out a minute later and basically curb stomps Giant Gonzalez out of the ring and all this good stuff. It was a bad match, really. A bad match that was one of the lowlights of what was ultimately a really poor WrestleMania IX. That was the one where they were Roman, and that was highlighted by the Bret Hart versus Yokozuna match, which Yokozuna won, and then Hulk Hogan comes out and for some reason gets a title shot and beats Yoko for the title. It was just a poorly executed WrestleMania. Looked pretty, but poorly executed. Skip a year, and we go to WrestleMania 11 for The Undertaker's fourth match against King Kong Bundy. King Kong Bundy, this was another less than 10-minute match. This was another really boring match. Not, I think, to any detriment of The Undertaker, but it's, you're in there with King Kong Bundy. There's only so much that you can do with the guy, right? What actually ended up being more exciting than the match itself was all the urn play, we'll call it, between Paul Bearer and Ted DiBiase, who was managing King Kong Bundy at the time. I don't know if they called it the Corporation at that time or whatever, but Ted DiBiase had this stable of guys, and he had stolen the urn from Paul Bearer. And then Paul Bearer got the urn back, and then Kama came down and attacked Paul Bearer and took the urn back and said he was going to melt it down to a chain and wear it around his neck. And that was more exciting than the actual match. Less than 10-minute match, obviously. Undertaker wins the match. It was not, unfortunately, another one of these throwaway matches at the grandest stage of them all, and luckily we have had fewer of those sort of as the years have gone by. Move on to the next year, WrestleMania 12, Undertaker's fifth match with Big Daddy Cool Diesel. This was a brawl, if I remember this match correctly. It was around 15 minutes, maybe a little more than 15 minutes, but it didn't feel like it drug on, because these are two guys that at the time I really liked, so I like watching this match. And it was a brawl. It was very back and forth. There was a lot of fighting on the outside, everything like that. And I mean, these guys really went at each other, and I remember the lasting image of Diesel basically right in the middle of the ring like this after getting tombstoned and pinned. That's another one of those sort of memory-jarring images from those days in the WWF. So this was actually a really good match. Broke the 15-minute barrier, which I think any good wrestling match, you really need to break that 15-minute barrier. So I liked this match a lot. I know some people don't like it very much, but this was the 5th match for The Undertaker at WrestleMania. He's now 5-0. And then you move on to the next year. WrestleMania 13, a no disqualification match for the WWF Championship, Undertaker versus Psycho Sid. And this was another really brawling match, sort of a back and forth match in the same vein as the match the year before with Diesel. This match was highlighted by interference from Bret Hart. Bret Hart and Psycho Sid were in the midst of a big feud at this time. So Bret Hart actually came out pre-match and talked some smack, and sort of got batted away by Sid, and then these guys are having the match, and Bret Hart comes out again afterwards, and anyway, so Undertaker ends up winning this match, winning the WWF Championship at WrestleMania, due in small part to, you know, Bret Hart coming out and interfering late in the match. Decent match, not great, not terrible. In WrestleMania 13 as a whole was kind of, you know, it was good, but it wasn't great and everything like that. So, you know, decent match, 20 minutes. It was around 20 minutes, maybe even a little more. So certainly hit the right time for a championship title match. 6 matches, 6 victories. Next year, WrestleMania 14, Undertaker's first WrestleMania confrontation with Cain. This was after Cain made his debut. He debuted during Undertaker and Shawn Michaels' Hell in a Cell match. Hell in a Cell? First Blood. Hell in a Cell. And and there was a lot of, you know, Undertaker, I won't fight my brother, I don't want to fight my brother, all this stuff. Ultimately, he says, yes, I'm gonna fight Cain, I'm gonna fight him at WrestleMania. This was around a 15-minute match. I actually hold this match fairly near and dear. I actually really enjoyed this match. I know a lot of people didn't, because at the time, Cain was just supposed to be this monster, and you put monster up against monster, and some people didn't seem to like it. I really liked it. Match was highlighted by Cain kicking out of 2 tombstones in the match, and basically kicking out of the 3rd one. And that's actually, I've always kind of debated in my head, find the match and watch the end, because like right at 3, Cain gets his shoulder up, and it was a clean 3, don't get me wrong, but I always wonder if maybe that was a botch. Was Cain maybe supposed to kick out of the 3rd tombstone and was just too late? I kind of, you know, I've tossed it around in my head, but anyways, I really liked the match. It was Paul Bearer in Cain's corner. Paul Bearer had come back and brought Cain in to sort of destroy The Undertaker. So 3 tombstones in the match. Taker finally beat him on the 3rd one. I really like the match. I hold the match sort of near and dear. Like I said, some people don't like it, but that is win number 7. Go on to the next year, WrestleMania 15. Undertaker's 8th match against the Big Boss Man. And this was a Hell in a Cell match, a WrestleMania 15. It was only around a 10-minute match, was not very competitive. This was when Undertaker's ministry was big in a feud with Vince McMahon's corporation, and Boss Man, of course, was representing Vince's corporation. So Undertaker basically destroys him, but what was so cool about this match was after the match was over, Edge, Christian, and Gangrel from the Brood come down from the ceiling, and they slide this noose through the top of the cage and tie it off, and this was the hanging of Big Boss Man. Undertaker puts it around Boss Man's neck, and then they lift the cell, and it's literally, he's like hanging there from the cell, 10 or so feet off the ground, and Undertaker's just in the ring like this. And that was back when like his gimmick was at its peak, and everybody was totally sold out for the gimmick, and they loved it. And I thought it was a bit of a, it was a quick match, but it was the build up to the match and the continuing of the storyline through that match was what really highlighted that for me. Plus, the dude got hung, and that's pretty badass. 8-0. Skip a year, go to WrestleMania X7. And this was the first confrontation with Triple H. And this is match number 9. There's a little more than a 15-minute match. I think it was a no holds barred match, maybe. I can't seem to remember. But this was the Undertaker's WrestleMania debut as his American Badass gimmick. He came down to the ring on his bike to Limp Bizkit, I believe, playing My Way. And this was... the match got underway right away. I think Triple H came out of the ring and met him, and they were just sort of brawling around, and was actually, I thought, was a really good match. I have it on DVD, and I go back to it every now and then because it was just a really cool match that I liked watching. So yeah, a little more than 15 minutes. Undertaker ultimately won the match with... Was it a Last Ride that he won the match with? I'm trying to remember if it was Last Ride or a Tombstone, but that was the match too where I remember Paul Heyman is on commentary for the match, and Undertaker goes to lift Triple H up for the last ride, and Triple H has a sledgehammer in his hand, and this is when they use those plastic. Well, maybe not plastic or rubber or whatever sledgehammers, and he nails it right off his head, and he actually injured Taker, cut him quite badly, and that's when they stopped using the fake ones and started using real sledgehammers because they were safer. And he wrings it off of his head, and the sledgehammer goes flying, and Taker still kicks out, and so that there were high spots in that match that were just phenomenal, and it ended up making it a really solid match. Undertaker wins again, 9 wins, no losses. The next year, WrestleMania X8 against the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. This was match number 10. This is a no disqualification match. It was around a 15-minute match. I don't remember a ton about the match. Actually, this is one that I couldn't seem to find anywhere on YouTube, so I didn't get a chance to actually go back and rewatch the match. But what I do remember about it was at the end of the match, it was the first time that The Undertaker himself made a direct reference to the streak. Because at the end of the match, he's leaning against the ropes, and he goes like this. And he holds up 10 fingers to indicate 10-0 at WrestleMania. So it's his first direct reference to his undefeated streak at WrestleMania. We move on to the next match, WrestleMania 19. This is the 11th WrestleMania match for Undertaker, and this is one that ended up being a bit of a clusterfuck. It was a handicap match against Big Show and A-Train. And originally this was supposed to be a tag match. It was supposed to be A-Train and Big Show against Undertaker, and I believe it was Nathan Jones was the guy that was his protege at the time. For whatever reason, the booking changed, and it was booked as a handicap match, and this was not a match that he wanted to be booked in. He has gone on record and say, I didn't want to be booked in that handicap match, but I didn't really have a choice. So he gets booked in the handicap match. It's a less than 10-minute match. It was not a very good match, especially on a WrestleMania that had other phenomenal matches, highlighted, I thought, by Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho. So it wasn't a very good match. Like I say, it wasn't a match that he wanted really to be booked in. So kind of went in and did what they had to do, and, there it is. But that is 11-0.